I've been swinging steel maces for over 10 years now. And one of the things that I've learned over those 10 years is that it's not about the task at hand, but it's about the body that you bring to the steel mace swing. What I learned as I was coaching workshops around the United States and around the world was that a lot of people didn't have the capacity for movement required to swing the steel mace. So there were a lot of lack of mobility issues. And so I've dedicated my time to programming and helping people learn about the mobility constraints that they have between the elbows, the shoulders, and the spine to help them improve their mace swing. Yo, what's up? I'm Coach Rich Thurman, also known as Coach RT3, and today we're going to talk about why you should be doing carves as a warm-up prior to your steel mace swing. Now, for those of you who may not know, I've swung steel mace for a very long time. But over the years, after teaching workshops around the world, one of the things that I've come back to is understanding that the body that I bring to the activity that I want to do is more important than the actual activity. As we age and as we start to put more volume into our tissues, we want to begin to do things that help our body not only recover, but prime and give our body an opportunity to be strong and resilient. One of the things that I found with carves was that it gave me an opportunity to not only take a joint by joint approach to helping my body feel better, but also helping it move better. Now, carves is only one element of mobility training that I actually do, but to me, it's one of the fundamental elements. I do it as a daily routine, but I also integrate it into my training on a regular basis. One of the reasons I do that is because, one, it brings awareness to the tissues that I'm about to utilize. Two, everyone knows that joint movement is important for joint health. Three, when you're moving your joints around through their fullest range of motion, you're able to push the synovial fluids around in that joint, nourishing the tissues that belong to that joint. One of the things that I think is important is as we look at the steel mace and we look at the movement that we do, mainly the swing, everything in our upper body, from our hips all the way up, takes part in that steel mace swing. So I'm going to take you through step by step, and I'm going to explain to you why each car is relevant to our steel mace movement. Let's get started. So the very first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to start from the top. Now, a lot of people might say, well, your neck is not involved in the movement, but your neck is involved in the movement. Your neck is always going to be involved in the activity. Not only are they independent joints that move on their own or should be able to move freely on their own, but they're all interconnected. And so you can't simply decide you're going to move one part of the spine without affecting another part. So starting with cervical carves or neck carves is going to be where I begin, and then I'm going to work my way down the spine. The fundamental movement of the spine is flexion and extension, but we're going to take this through flexion, extension, and all the rotational elements of it as well, because rotation is involved in the steel mace swing. So the very first thing I'm going to do is stand up nice and tall. I'm going to begin to flex the spine. So only moving the neck, bringing the chin down to the chest. From there, I'm going to imagine I have a pin on my chin, and I'm going to take that pin and I'm going to draw a part of a circle all the way over to the collarbone as I rotate, trying to look over the shoulder. Once I run out of room here, I'm going to tip the ear behind my shoulder, and then I'm going to take the chin and I'm going to take that pin that's on the bottom and draw a circle or a semicircle across the sky or the ceiling or whatever it is that you're looking at. All the way over to the opposite side. I'm going to tilt that ear forward, and then I'm going to begin to rotate back to the center, ending off where I began. Now you can do that back the other direction, and you can do that for a number of reps just until you get a little bit of movement, a little bit of fluidity in that joint. Now I'm going to move down to the rest of the spine. Now, as we know, during the steel mace swing, what happens is we get a lot of rotation through our thoracic spine. And these are thoracolumbar carves, which gives us an opportunity to not only explore the flexion and extension of the spine, but also the spine as it moves through flexion, extension, and those rotational elements. So the very first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to bring the hands across the chest. I'm going to bring the chin to the chest, so I'm locking that in position. I'm not going to move the chin from that position this entire time. I'm going to imagine I have lasers on my shoulders. I'm going to flex my spine into a C shape. So I'm trying to bring the belt buckle towards my face. So my abs should be working here. Once I've run out of flexion here, I'm not trying to bend at the torso. So I'm not trying to bend over at the torso here. I just want the flexion of the thoracic spine as it relates to our lumbar spine. Once I'm in that maxed out amount of flexion that I have for my personal body, I'm going to begin to twist and rotate. So I'm rotating, twisting through the obliques. Once I run out of room here, I'm going to laterally flex. So laterally flexing the spine, and then I'm going to tip the shoulder back. So kind of like I tipped the ear back with the cervical cars, I'm going to tip the shoulder back behind me into extension, and I'm going to make my way over to the opposite side. Once I get to that opposite side, I'm going to tilt upward out of lateral flexion, and then I'm going to rotate back to center. Okay, you can do that going back the other direction as well. So do a number of reps both directions until you feel like you've gotten a little bit of motion in that area. Next, I'm going to move to my scapula. Now, the scapula is a part of the shoulder structure, and so we all know that swinging a steel mace involves shoulder movement. And so prepping the shoulders for movement is going to be super important for this activity. So I'm going to start with the palms at my sides. I'm going to elevate the shoulders, so bringing the shoulders towards the ears like I'm saying, I don't know. And then I'm going to take these shoulders and I'm going to point them towards each other like I'm trying to bring them together and to kiss each other. So I'm taking my scapula and I'm bringing them apart from one another. So that's protraction. And then so I'm in elevation and protraction, and then I'm going to depress. So I'm bringing the scapulas down, sliding on that rib cage. And then I'm going to bring the scapulas into retraction, pulling them back behind me. So the shoulders now in the front are trying to move as far away from each other as possible. And then I'm going to elevate, protract, depress, and retract. You can reverse that, going the opposite direction. Same thing, protract, elevate, retract, and depress. Okay? What you want to make certain of is that your elbows don't bend during that. We don't want elbow trigger happy elbows. We want the elbows to stay neutral, and that way we're focusing solely on the scapular movements. Before we jump into the shoulder cars, I'm going to start in the extremities. And so I'm going to start with the wrists. Now, as we think about swinging a steel mace, we don't often think about our wrist involvement. And our wrists are pretty locked into a specific position, but as we move with the mace, the wrist does move slightly. Although it's locked, we are changing position slightly as we move through that motion. Now, one of the things that I want to stress is that when we think about swinging a mace or pressing a barbell or doing any of these activities have a specific line of tissue that we're focused on strengthening, a specific pathway that we need to solidify. But what we do is, because we do so much volume of that tissue and so much volume of those reps, we start to constrain and limit the ranges of motion that our joints actually have available. So what we want to do is we want to think about the fact that what we're doing with cars is saying to our body, this is your fundamental ability, this is your capacity, this is your range. We want to explore this as much as possible. We want to explore that range, or that full range, just as much as we explore that bench press, or we explore that kettlebell swing, or we explore that steel mace swing. In that context, we're looking at training in a different lens. We're looking at it from an internal perspective. We're looking at it from a human health perspective, as opposed to the perspective of the task that we want to achieve. So my wrists are designed to rotate through a full range of motion. So I'm going to have my palms out here like I'm holding a tray, and I'm going to bring the pinkies in towards each other. Once I run out of room in this motion, I'm going to show the palms away from me. So I'm going into wrist extension. And then I'm going to sweep across into the outside, bringing the pinkies away from each other. And then I'm going to bring the palms towards myself until they face me into flexion. And then I'm going to bring those pinkies in towards each other again while I move back through that motion, creating that circular pattern. Okay, we can do that both directions. Same thing going back the opposite direction. What we want to be cognizant of is that we want to imagine there's something on our wrist or on our forearm. If our forearms are rotating, that's no longer wrist movement. That's now elbow movement, because the elbow is responsible for the rotation of the forearm. So once again, just moving through that motion, imagining we have something on our forearm that we don't want to drop, and just moving gently through that motion, both directions, until you feel like you've got some good movement in there. All right, the next thing we're going to focus on is the elbow. So, as I said previously, the elbow is designed to rotate, but we often only see the elbow as a flex and extend or a hinge joint. So we do our bicep curls, we do our tricep push downs, we do our steel mace swings, and we have our elbows in that position behind our head. But we don't think about the fact that as we're moving into that position, our elbow is actually doing some slight rotations as we move through that steel mace swing motion. Okay, so preparing for that rotational movement is also going to be important. So I'm going to start with my palms facing, shoulder blades down and back, sitting up nice and tall. I'm going to go into elbow flexion. But as I go into flexion, I'm going to imagine trying to squeeze out as much rotation as I can. So I'm trying to supinate or rotate as much as I can, bringing the thumbs away from me. And then I'm going to rotate. So now I'm pronating. Rotate until the palms are showing. And then I'm going to press down like I'm doing a tricep push down. And as I do that, I'm trying to squeeze out a little bit more pronation. Now at the bottom here, instead of rotating, you can rotate and go back into supination, but instead of rotating here for this demonstration, I'm going to stay in pronation. You can keep that pronation and you can try and squeeze out more pronation as you move to the top. And then we can rotate again here at the top into supination, and we can do the same thing going downward, trying to squeeze out more supination as we go into extension of the elbow. Okay, so we've got two different ways in which we can go through both extension and flexion of the elbows, either in pronation or supination. And so that's just going to give you an opportunity to explore, but it also should give you an opportunity to bring awareness to what is it that my elbows are capable of. How much pronation do I have? How much supination do I have? Oftentimes we don't think about these things. And our pronation and supination, or the limitations there, can affect our ability not only to swing the mace, but our ability to throw a ball, our ability to pronate enough to get into a bench press, pronate enough to be in a push-up position. All of these different elements of what our elbow is required to do in order to complete the task that we want to do. Finally, we'll end with the shoulder. Now we can do fingers and all that sort of stuff too, but that's just a little bit over the top. But you should move your fingers around and make sure that you stretch your hand and fingers as well, because you're doing a lot of grip work. So be cognizant of that. We're going to end with the shoulder. And so the shoulder car, or the glenohumeral car, this is your glenohumeral joint, your humerus bone, and your glenoid, and all this tissue here, which is loosely kind of attached to create the shoulder joint. We're going to start in external rotation of the shoulder. So palm facing forward, elbow is locked in straight. We're going to come across the body into adduction and flexion. Once we run out of adduction and flexion, pinching the chest there, we're going to continue to move up into flexion overhead. So once we run out of flexion overhead, and this is a very important one, and a key thing to note when it comes to steel mace swinging, is we want to pay attention to if we're using our shoulder or are we using our spine to try and get more range. How much overhead flexion does the person you're working with have, or how much overhead flexion do you actually have available for your steel mace swings? Because that's going to tell you a lot about the range of motion that you have. Also, it's going to tell you a lot about what you're utilizing in order to complete the task. Because if I get to a certain point and I run out of overhead flexion and I have to use my spine to create that motion, I'm gonna probably create my spine in extension to get that motion as I go through my swing as well. So now I'm loading my spine in extension and trying to rotate, which is a recipe for disaster. So I'm in overhead flexion as much as I have available to myself. I imagine I have a big X on my bicep. I want to turn that X away from me. So I'm imagining I'm turning that X away from me so that it's showing out that direction. And as I move into internal rotation, I'm extending back behind me as far as I can. So trying not to move the rest of my body or twist, extending back as far as I can until the back of the palm is next to the pocket. Okay, I'm gonna reverse that, extending back until I run out of room. I can't extend any further. Once I can't extend any further, I'm gonna begin to externally rotate, sweeping up back into flexion overhead. I'm gonna continue externally rotating, returning through the path that I started from, adduction, and then back to the starting point. You can do that for both sides. You can do that for as many reps as you feel like you need. You can do it in between sets. I often integrate it in between the sets and rep schemes that I'm doing, just so I can remind my tissues that rotation is the fundamental movement of that joint, and get my joints to understand, or get my nervous system to understand and create and continue to reinforce that mapping of my shoulder joint. Hopefully this video helped you understand a little bit more about preparing for steel mace swing. Remember, if you like this video, smash the like button, subscribe to my channel, and leave me a comment. Let me know how it goes for you. I'll leave all the relevant links in the description below.